All right, welcome everyone. This is a presentation about some of the work that the group I'm part of has been doing down at what we're calling Fringe Cup Creek, or also called Stevens Creek, which is in the Portland area. So I'm going to go through, give a little information about how we got some of the restoration permits to do the work down there, what inspired this work, what's been done in the 6 months since we've gotten the permits, and some of the other exciting things that are coming down the way. And really wanting this conversation to open up the possibilities for people to explore some of the land that's owned by the local transit authorities in your area and get curious about how these restoration projects might start popping up in a variety of places across, especially the US and Canada, but really anywhere where the Transportation Authority owns and stewards land. So to start off here, I'm going to share my screen to give you a little bit of context here about where we're talking. So this is the so-called Portland area, which is in the Willamette Valley. And this is the Columbia River, which is kind of our main watershed, flows all the way to the ocean. And then this here is the Willamette River. So it has a confluence with the Columbia up there, just past Vancouver. And this is the greater Portland area here. And where our project is situated is a tributary to the Willamette River that is currently called Stevens Creek. And it actually starts up, yes, up around this area. And it flows down alongside this Capitol Hill Road. This is a little natural area that the Parks and Rec Department stewards. And there has been a little bit of restoration work up here near the headwaters. Yeah, and then it flows down through this natural area. There are a lot of culverts where it goes underneath this red mire and goes underneath the freeway. And then it comes out in the area that we are currently stewarding here. And so this is the creek coming down from underneath the freeway, and there's culverts there. And then the creek continues flowing down through this little ravine here all the way down to the Willamette River. So it's about 2.5 miles of creek. And what's really exciting about this place that I learned after I started stewarding it is that this is one of the only places in Portland, I think it is the only place where 4 of the most common salmonid species spawn. So it's a very, very special creek, and we're very excited to be doing restoration work here. So the other thing that I found out about this place is that there's an active beaver population, and there are also deer in the area. We found crawdads. There's an endangered elderberry beetle down here, and lots of native plants that have already been here. And as you can see in this Google map, there's already a lot of trees and a lot of native plants. So to introduce you to this space a little bit more, this is the I-5 freeway. And this green zone is what we have permitted here. So it's 6 acres. This area, and this little red area are all owned by ODOT, which is the Oregon Department of Transportation. They're the local transit authority here in Oregon. So it's owned by the state. And then this purple zone, as well as most of this zone, is owned by Metro, which is our regional government here in the Portland area. So we have this permit right now to do restoration work along the creek in this zone, and we got those in March, and our renewal comes back up in March of 2026, at which point I believe we're going to also adopt this section as well and start doing restoration work there. Yeah, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of what the area is that I'm talking about. And then just to show you some of what these little icons mean. So the blue areas are little places of interest that we've named, really trying to help people spend more time in this landscape and give it some love and attention. The yellow are places where there were already native plants that we marked. So snowberry, wild roses, and more wild roses, Pacific 9 bark in a couple places, lots of ossoberry in this zone, Pacific waterleaf and Pacific ninebark, and there's also salmonberry. Yeah, here there's a big salmonberry patch here, and I don't have this one marked, but there's a big thimbleberry patch up here. And recently, we also found some blackcap raspberry in this zone, which is a fairly rare raspberry that's growing wild. And we found some huckleberry in this zone as well. So very exciting. Those are the plants that were already there. There's also a lot of vining maple and western red cedars and alders, in especially this zone is where the alders are, and cedars and maples throughout this zone, with some cottonwoods sprinkled in here and there. And then the purple are trees that we've planted. So mostly what's listed is red cedars and white oaks that we've planted that were donated from Lost Valley Education Center. But we've also recently, as of Saturday, added another 20 trees, alders, red cedars, and oaks, and also another 65 native plants of varying varieties that I can talk about later. So to give you an idea of what it looks like in person from the ground, go through a little photo slideshow. So this is the creek, and you can see some of the infrastructure here. This is the Terwilliger Boulevard, which is a city street, and then there's the on-ramp to I-5 here. So this is in the zone that we don't have permitted, and then this zone over here is the permitted area. This is a city pipe. It's actually a sewer pipe that went across the creek. And when I found this, it's what made me start getting curious about who owns this, what's going on. This area was very stagnant and had a lot of bugs. There was a smell that was going on. I wasn't sure about the integrity of the pipe. It was pretty low, and there wasn't a lot of water flow. And normally you want to slow down the water in a landscape. But I was just noticing that it just didn't seem healthy. There was I said, a smell and a lot of insects. So I got really curious about who owned the pipe. And the pipe is owned by the city, but the land is owned by the state. So it was kind of an interesting experience too. And this is another picture of the pipe from the other side. So you can kind of see how much debris has built up here. And yeah, it was really interesting to work with those two entities. And they actually did bring someone down to undam it, which happened very fast and was kind of abrupt. I was like, oh, that's not permaculture. But they did undam it because they didn't want the dam to affect the pipe. And so that's changed this area of the stream a lot. And you can see there's a semi truck tire that we're still trying to figure out how to get out of the creek. But this is some other pictures of the creek, just exploring the area. It's pretty steep here. So there's some stairs that were already here that go down. And we have the area to the right permitted and a little bit of this area to the left. We haven't really done anything on this little stretch by the stairs because there is a fence line and the neighbors have a lot of invasive plants. So we're kind of trying to focus on getting this set up as an anchor point and working on this hillside and then down toward the creek. And yeah, this is another picture of the creek, and these are the stairs from below. So this is a lot of the area that we've been working on, and the alders here. And yeah, this is the access road that follows the creek. So this we can't do any planting on, but this is earlier this spring. This is when the creek fills up. So that's that same pipe that was undammed just a few months later. And then this is how much water runs through it. And this is a stormwater drain here. So just tons and tons of water coming in from off the street here. And this is a year-round flow. So all year there's water in this creek. Some volunteers working on an ivy pole. We have a trash pickup through the local transit authority. So per the permits, we have to do trash pickup 4 times a year and do invasive weed removal 2 times a year. But we've been meeting monthly, and every time they will come and they'll pick up the big trash and the bagged trash that we find. So we've pulled these tires out, we've pulled shopping carts out. There were a couple kiddie pools we pulled out at one point. And as we keep working down there, there's less and less trash to pick up. This is some of the ivy that we've been turning into wreaths and baskets from down there. So in permaculture, really thinking about obtaining a yield. So we've been curious about what we can do with all the ivy we're pulling. And then also just some cedar branches that fell or were trimmed and we've been turning those into little incense bundles. Some more ivy wreaths in some of the baskets that have been made. Um, yeah, cute little baskets. And so the beavers were busy. So this is the area just behind the pipe. The pipe is kind of like over here, and they they added sticks to it very quickly. So we're always working with the beavers and getting curious about their relationship to the land, and some ducks that were nesting there this summer. Um, this is another shot from kind of the far end of the creek. So there's actually like a mulch pile in this area or nearby that is at the very end of the road. And then this is the on-ramp to I-5. So this is kind of the far end of the creek. So you can see the creek right there. The volunteers planting oaks together. It's one of the oaks we planted. And then again, this is kind of where the on-ramp to I-5 is underneath there. So you can see it in kind of different seasons. And then ODOT came through and cut a bunch of these trees because they were touching some of the infrastructure. And so we used them as natural terracing along the path so that they would kind of catch water and accumulate some natural compost. And so a lot of what the planting we did on this last Saturday, we did it along this terrace here. More of the trash, one of those scooters that we pulled out of the creek area. Lots of ivy that we've been pulling off of trees. This is a picture of the creek from the road. So standing up on the Terwilliger Road, the Terwilliger Bridge over this creek, you can see Mount Hood in the background. But all of these trees, this is the creek zone. So it's a really beautiful, flourishing area, riparian area that we're working on here. And then I'm not sure that you'll be able to see this video, but okay. Let's see if I can just bring it up for a second. Okay, never mind. But there's a lot of water that comes straight down off of the freeway from there. So, and it just kind of pools at the bottom of that road. So we've been working on a trench to bring some of the water away from the road and bring it to more of the plants and keep that going. We built this little rock berm to slow down some of the water in the area. This is our mulch pile, which was a collaboration with Chip Drop, which is a national US program where arborists will come and drop free wood chips. And if you do 8 inches of mulch, then you don't have to water in a zone. So that's really exciting. So it's a really good planting technique. It's also really good to mulch paths, keep the hyperabundant plants from resprouting. So that's been a good collaboration. And this was a partnership with the state, with Chip Drop, and with the neighbor who lives over here who let us use the space. So that was a nice neighborhood collaboration. So there's the mulch pile, and this is the path that goes into this creek area that we've been talking about. And another little picture of the creek at night. This is a community altar that we've been building in the zone. And it's underneath this overpass. It's in the spot where the plants really don't grow because of how much of the runoff falls from these 2 zones. So we've just been repurposing that as like a sacred space, like an anchor point to the creek and to offer some love and some care to the space as the water is flowing and hoping to just cleanse it a little bit in spirit, if not in chemical composition. Although we're working on that over time. This is one of the deer who live in the zone. I believe that there's 3 who come and go throughout there. I haven't seen the beaver yet, but I've seen lots of beaver evidence. So, and this is one of the binding maple seeds I just think is so cute. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what started this project and how we actually got the permits here. So let's see, let me pull up the work plan. So this is what I actually submitted to ODOT. So this was a very rough sketch because I didn't really know how to do mapping at the time. But yeah, so I kind of split it up into work zones. So we have zone 1, and then so this gray is the access road, and then the blue is the creek. And I really wanted to focus on zone 5 most of all because this is the area that gets the most water and is going to be, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy to keep the plants alive because there's already water nearby. So this is what I sent to them as like, okay, here's what we're going to do in zone 1, here's what we're going to do in zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. And then I also submitted a planting plan to them. But yeah, what really inspired this was I went to Lost Valley Education Center in August of 2024, and I was actually in the Birthing Bioregional Learning Centers class through the Design School for Regenerating Earth here. And I got really inspired about my landscape, and I got really inspired by seeing the eco village at Lost Valley Education Center and all the things that they've been able to do there. I'm really inspired by the intro to permaculture class that I did there. And I thought, oh, I really want to move to this eco village, but I'm really established in my neighborhood. And actually, I live right here. And so I have like a co-housing place that I really love, and I know a lot of the neighbors, and I've been doing a lot of work here in Portland, and so it's hard for me to imagine moving outside of the city. And so I was like, okay, what is the eco village sized piece of where I live? And I just went for a walk, and I found I'd been walking down this place, but I hadn't really given it a second thought. Like, there's not a lot of like places to sit or places to reflect in this zone, at least right now. And so I didn't really think about it until I was looking at it from a permaculture lens, from an eco village lens, and going, who owns this? Where did this come from? Who's stewarding this? What can I help? Like, can I get the tires out of this creek? And so I asked a lot of questions. And luckily, Portland has a thing called portlandmaps.com. And I believe most cities have a similar thing, but it has all of the zoning like maps, and it has a lot of the pipe maps. So I was able to research the pipe and find out who owned the pipe and then talk to them. And then they were able to tell me that the state actually owns the land. And then I found out that ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and also most local transit authorities have the an adopt a landscape or adopt a highway program. And so through that, I asked a lot of questions of like, hey, is this property eligible for the adopt a landscape program or adopt a highway program? And they're like, "Oh, do you mean this little piece of land here? This one's eligible." And I was like, "No, I'm really thinking about like this one." And they're like, "Well, okay, submit a work plan and we'll see what we can do." So yeah, I split it up into these 5 zones. I talked about where we were going to do invasive removal, hyperabundant plant removal, and trash pickup and things like that, and doing some on-site compost. And I also really, really wanted to replant some of the trees. And that usually the transit authority gets worried about that because of visibility issues with the road. But because this zone is so big, and because there's the, especially the zone 5 is far enough away from the infrastructure that they're not concerned, and because it's so far underneath the on ramp, they gave us special permission to plant trees. And so I submitted them this very rudimentary planting plan, which again, I was very new into maps at this time. So, but I had all these circles for the different types of plants that I was going to seek from the local nursery. And so I have vine maple in here, serviceberry, salal flowering red currant, tall Oregon grape, cattail, and honeysuckles as like the small shrubs that we were going to plant, and then red alder, white oak, and western red cedar. And this planting plan ultimately did have to change a little bit because some of these zones were not very accessible as we kind of dug deeper into the space, and then some of the plants just were simply not available at the nursery. So we had to switch some of these out, but most of the planting happened along this zone and even further up here along this bank, which is really where most of the soil erosion has occurred. So it felt really important to focus in that zone. Um, yeah, and then so once I got really curious about getting the permits and having some kind of plan, having volunteers in place, then I did have to I had to figure out how do I do this? Like, I can't just do this by myself. And I don't know if you've seen in your landscapes, but sometimes you're driving along the freeway and it'll said like this highway adopted by such and such organization, right? So they're like, "Well, what name do you want on the sign?" And I was like, "Well, it'd be really weird to have my name on there." So I was at the time also trying to build our own little like regenerative group here. So Regenerate North Willamette Valley was coming on the scene, and so it's like, hey, would you be willing to hold the permit in your name, like as an organization, so that we can get a little bit more recognition in the neighborhood, and also just have this as a primary project where we're doing like boots on the ground work together. And they were like, yeah, that sounds great. And so they went ahead and took on the permits, which was lovely. But you can do it as an individual. Like I think that's what's really lovely about this is that you can just opt into this program as an individual. You don't have to have a nonprofit or a 501c3 or any kind of legal entity at all to adopt these landscapes, which I think is really amazing. And it's totally free. Like that's the other really amazing thing is like, okay, you want land, you want to do restoration work, you want to try out all of these permaculture principles that you've been learning, and there's free land available. So as I dug deeper into all of this, I found out that the local transit authorities own most of the land within 50 feet of any state or federal road, which is a crazy amount of land. And it's often in these weird, long, skinny, road shaped pieces. But that doesn't mean that there's not still a lot of regeneration possible in those zones. And so, also thinking about how, and I'm gonna share my screen again real quick. Um, but yeah, thinking about there's a lot of times where the waterway has either intentionally or like the freeway has been intentionally built near a waterway so that they can send the stormwater down toward the waterway, or they've re-engineered the waterway near the road so that the water can be drained in a particular way. So there's a lot of crossover between the land that is near a road and the waterways, which is good in terms of if you're doing a permaculture design and you want to bring the water in an easeful way, then great, these zones are available and plentiful to adopt. But the problem is that there's a lot of heavy metals and microplastics and oils and chemicals and things coming in from that stormwater runoff that you're going to be contending with. So in terms of creating food and regenerating the soil and doing water testing, like that, it's going to be probably not a good place for food growing because of the degradation of the soil and the heavy metals in the soil. But there's still things you can do, and there's still really beautiful regenerative things that can be done in this zone, especially when you're not focusing on edibles. But I think that I have a curiosity about like turning this into more of a food ready environment, and maybe thinking about some ways to adjust where the stormwater is coming in accordingly, or maybe do some filtration. But haven't quite gotten that far in the project yet. Anyway, so as I was seeking volunteers for this project, I one thing that's really been important to me is like, okay, I live a block away, and so it's really easy for me to come down here basically every day if I want to, and just see it, just observe it, be present in the space, give it a little love, give it a little attention, maybe cut some ivy off the trees. And so I was trying to get the neighborhood involved because those are the people who live close and they care about this area. So I focused on bringing in the team from Regenerate Northern Willamette Valley, who is local and lives close. But I also got in touch with the neighborhood association. I got in touch with the neighborhood emergency team. I sent letters to neighbors in the area. I put up flyers. There's also in our area, there's an app called Nextdoor that allows you to connect with neighbors who are close to you. So I posted about it there. And I also connected with Westside Watersheds, which is a Portland specific program that is set up by the city to help these local projects get off the ground and do some restoration work. So they've been in partnership with us, and they donated some of the plants that we planted in the ground on Saturday. So just really looking at like who's around, who's already doing some of this work, who can I pull in? And so we've had a steady stream of volunteers, usually between 12 and 24 people show up every month and just really do a lot of this work together. And most of them are neighbors. And I really do try to make it really accessible for anyone who's coming. Like I want this to be a way that we're all meeting each other and meeting the neighbors and building resilience and building community. And so I don't want physical labor or the inability to do physical labor to be something that creates a barrier for people to come and be part of this resilient community. And so I make sure that I always bring a little sitting circle of chairs and encourage people to bring crafts, and I'll have like some baskets on display if people want to like try to make their own baskets so that there's something for people to do. I also really encourage people to bring their kids, and that's been really lovely. We've had a few kids just kind of running around down there and enjoying the creek, but also walking the paths and exploring and learning about native edible plants and learning about native plants in general. So there's some just like light bioregional education going on as well throughout this process. And I really like to say that even if all you do is come down and walk the paths, like that is helpful. That keeps the weeds down, but also like it just helps you get in touch with your landscape. And recently, a friend of mine found a bunch of oyster mushrooms growing in the zone and harvested some and brought some to us. And one of the volunteers, who's a friend of mine from Vancouver, who's coming down to see the project, was staying over at my house, and I made up the oyster mushrooms. I like fried them in a pan and served them for lunch with some other stuff. And they were so awestruck of like, we were just down there. We were just down there and we planted these trees and we mulched the trees and we were down by the creek and now we're eating mushrooms that grew down there. Like we are eating them. And I was like, yeah, it's really cool. And so just really seeing the ways that it's lighting people up and getting people excited about really fully engaging in their landscape, in their neighborhood, I think is really what bioregionalism is all about for me. And so it's been really exciting to see that emerging. And then the last thing I want to talk about before I kind of open it up for discussion, curiosity, comments, feedback is so the creek formally is named Stevens Creek. And I was like, who's Stevens? Like, what is this? What is that? And it's a very small creek, right? Like it's not a very well-known creek. I had never heard anyone say the name of the creek except that I did digging on like Wikipedia about what is this called. And there's just a little blurb on Wikipedia that's like, well, the land was owned by Thomas Stevens, and he was a recipient of the Donation Land Claim Act in 1850. And I was like, what? What is this? What is the Donation Land Claim Act? That doesn't sound like, what's this is a little suspicious. So I did some digging, and the Donation Land Claim Act was basically the United States government trying to get people to settle the land in Oregon. And so it was sort of a little bit of an under the table way to get settlers and in and keep them there. And so Thomas Stevens was a recipient of one of those land claims, and therefore they named the creek after him. And so as I was making all these flyers and talking about the creek a lot and using the creek's name, I'm like, I don't really know that I want to keep proliferating this history here. It's not really feeling good to me. I don't feel like there's a relationship between the creek and this person anymore. And I'm uncomfortable continuing to use the name. And so I had this idea of like, maybe we could rename the creek. What does that look like? So I looked it up, and there's an Oregon Geographic Names Board, and I'm sure there's probably one for every state. And they allow you to petition to rename a creek or any kind of geographic feature as long as it's unique and as long as you notify all of the neighbors along that geographic area. So there are a lot of neighbors along the creek. It's a kind of a big area. But I did go on Google Maps and try to collect as many of the addresses of the people who live directly along the creek as I could. I sent them a letter about the restoration work that's being done, information about why this is an important creek in terms of restoration value, and invited them to come and see it and come and be part of one of our volunteer days, and also talked about the history of the Donation Land Claimed Act and why we were interested in renaming the creek. And we had looked through we had a list of all the native plants that grew in the area. And then we cross-referenced it with all the creek names in Oregon because it had to be a unique name. And so we went down all the native plants and we got to Fringe Cup. which is a native plant that grows very abundantly in this creek zone, and that doesn't have a creek named after it yet. So we're like, okay, all right, Fringe Cup seems like the going name. And so we've offered that as a possible rename for the creek. And I sent out about 150 letters. And I also notified the 4 neighborhood associations that are relevant to the creek area. I also informed the Parks and Rec department at the city because they have an area called Stevens Creek Natural Area. I was like, just so you know, there's this neighborhood initiative to rename the creek. So you might also consider renaming the natural area. And there's also an apartment complex that is called Stevens Creek Crossing Apartments. And so I notified them. And I got exactly one letter that back that was a little bit upset. They didn't want the history of the creek to be interrupted by a name change. And so we've been in conversation together, and there's just a lot of curiosity about like, how do we come to some kind of compromise here? And I've been doing a lot of reflecting about I considered trying to find the creek's original name, and because there's been a lot of tribes in the zone, but I realized pretty quickly there's not just one original name of this creek. There's lots of different names for this creek because there were lots of different tribes with lots of different languages, and maybe that's just right. Maybe that's just the way that it is that things have multiple names, and that's beautiful and that's significant. But as far as Fringe Cup and Stevens Creek goes, we are going to hold a council conversation where we have me and someone else in the neighborhood representing like the desire to rename the creek, as well as the person who sent the letter and another person that they're bringing who do not want to rename the creek, and then a representative from each of the 4 neighborhood associations. So we have people who are a little bit more neutral but still have a stake in the process, and we have an external facilitator coming in to facilitate a sociocratic selection process for whether or not to rename the creek. So that'll probably be happening in January, and I am unattached to the outcome, like whether the creek gets renamed officially or not. I think this will be a really great way to bring the neighborhood together, to start having these difficult conversations, to talk about the creek in general and the work being done down there, and just really celebrate the neighborhood coming together and doing this together on the land. So that's the project. And I've talked to a lot of different people in a lot of different areas throughout the US and Canada about this project, and trying to do little pilot versions of a similar work in various areas throughout those 2 countries. And so hopefully those projects get going and get their permits successfully, but really just want this to be more available to people who who care about the land, who want to do restoration work, but maybe don't have access to their own land or don't have the money to try these things out on their own land. So yeah, hopefully this inspires you. And yeah, I'm very curious about any questions you have, any thoughts you have about the project. Opening the floor now. Go for it, Karen.
Andra, this is amazing. I'm so delighted to hear this story, because you really do tell it like a beautiful story with the development of I'm invested in the characters, and I'm looking forward to the continuing story arc of this project. And one thing that I'm reflecting on is a project that I'm working on here in Wisconsin is the Badgerland. Wisconsin Badgers are the football team, the university logo. Badgerland Biodiversity Corridors Initiative. And part of what we're doing with that is has started in this rural context of encouraging landowners to consider these stacked functions, stacked benefits of credits for carbon sequestration, water restoration, and biodiversity habitat for pollinators and birds and different kinds of different kinds of like special interest groups that are like Trout Unlimited, for example, or Pheasants Forever, that are like, we want to put money into restoring habitat for the kinds of birds that we like, or the, pollinators that we like, or whatever. And we kind of have a mechanism for that to work. And so I want to share that more broadly as that becomes a thing. But I live in Milwaukee, which is an urban context. And when we started this meeting, which grew out of a breakfast at the Midwest Climate Summit a couple months ago, I live in an urban context, and I'm like, I love this idea of like paying people to take care of the habitat, but it doesn't sit great with me that I'm like using my volunteer hours to help landowners who are predominantly older white men who have benefited from all of these things, historical things. So let's make sure we also have an urban context and a peri-urban or suburban or whatever, non-rural context for it. And we are meeting with the city of Madison in like the first week of December. We're working on a date for that to talk about like a neighborhood improvement. Like they have ways of not only like a landowner who has a parcel, a front yard, a backyard, they might do it and plant trees or take their lawn out or something, that could count in a way that they would get paid every year for that ecological service. But also just as you're saying, like the Department of Transportation, the Parks Department, the things that are already doing the things, but the labor piece of it. So anyway, I'm super excited about what you've done here and want to see if I can weave it into what I'm doing here and bring it on back to you and Dave and Joan and anyone else who wants to play with that.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds super, super exciting. And I think it's a great example of looking around at the projects that already exist in the area where you are and really pulling them in together and seeing where the collaborations are overlapping. I think that's even more important in this world where the grant money is harder to find and we're needing to compete less for funding sources. And so bringing together these projects collaboratively seems like the way to move forward. And I will say, even in this very changed grant landscape, that the money existing for restoration work around like promoting fish pathways, promoting, pollinator gardens, native plant restoration, those grants are still very abundant. And for some of the more relationship tending, relationship weaving work in the bioregional world, it's hard to get funding because people don't fully understand what the benefit of stewarding those relationships, but they do understand the benefit of directly stewarding the land. So having sort of a more relational organization with some on the ground projects that can get funding and can support the larger labor picture, I think is a really helpful way to move forward. And I've definitely found that our regenerative work as Regenerate North Willamette Valley has gotten a lot more attention and a lot more support because we have a direct land-based project that we're working on. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in. And I'm excited to see how that emerges for you. Yeah, any other questions, comments? Dave?
Yeah, I just initially this is just very inspiring work that you've done. So thank you for that and being willing to share it with us here in the design school. It's very cool. Um, and it's interesting to see sharing all the details. You have the just like knowing that this land is going to be put to better use, but then there's also like all the gory details of there's all these organizations and here's the legal structure that you have to navigate, and which may or may not be fun for some people. Yeah, I don't know, but certainly it seems necessary in the world that we're in to be able to have that skill to be able to navigate those things. um, I'm not going to say that's fun for me, but I may have um, in other contexts like navigating different organizational structures and that sort of thing might be something that I could like doing that research and finding out all the details and that sort of thing. Um, yeah, but we'll see. So yeah, it's inspiring for me to maybe start it makes me feel framed in a way where I feel that maybe this is a thing I could do. Whereas before, maybe not. But it gives me context to help me better understand, not the exact steps that I need to take in my local place, but kind of a framework that I can kind of work within and kind of understanding the kind of things that I might run into. And then one thing that popped up to me in the context of today, and Karen, as you were talking about the stuff that you're doing, I wonder if there's a thing that can happen in local communities depending on how the property tax structure is set up in communities. If people are doing work on their land with, in your yard in a suburban home or wherever it might be, if you start creating pollinator gardens or permaculture work or whatever, there can be some kind of reciprocity with like alleviation of some of your property tax, or maybe all of your property tax. So depending on what it is, because it seems like that's kind of a thing. If land ownership is going to be a thing, then some of that is, nobody else has access to your land to be able to produce stuff off of that. So if it's private property, private land, then it seems reasonable. I mean, there's a lot more nuance and things like that, but it seems reasonable that you would pay property tax on it because nobody else has access to it. But if you're being productive and giving back to the community through whatever it might be, I don't know, maybe that's something that could happen there. It's just a thought that popped into my head, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that in, Dave. Yeah, and I just want to say, in terms of the work required bureaucratically to get these permits, I sent a couple emails to the ODOT, so to the Transit Authority, the people who are specifically stewarding the district that I'm in, and the Adopt a Highway, Adopt a Landscape program through them. And I did have to kind of like keep up with them, kind of can remind them like, I'm still here, I'm still interested in this. Can we work together? But yeah, so it was a series of emails, and they sent me a one-page form to fill out about, what kind of work I'm planning to do, how often I'm planning to do the work. And it was pretty easy form to fill out, not a big deal. I did submit kind of the bigger work plan because the tree planting specifically, was not something they usually allow. And so I had to do a little bit more work to get that special permission. But it really was just giving them a planting map and telling them where I was doing that. And then I do have to have the volunteers sign waivers. So I have a little waiver form that I have them fill out at the beginning of the volunteer days. And then I just copy that and send that to ODOT each month. So in terms of like the bureaucratic overhead for this project, it's pretty minimal. And from the moment that I realized I think I want to start pursuing this, which was in December of last year, to when we actually got the permits, was about 3 months. So there was a little bit of back and forth in the emails about the permit process, but a lot of that is just that the government agencies right now are going through a lot of shifts and change, and there's a lot of difficulty there. So things are just a little bit slower than they used to be. And so having some patience and some kindness and grace for that, but recognizing that these programs still exist and we should take advantage of them while they're here. So yeah, Joan.
Thanks, Andra. This is just a awesome initiative, and I'm so excited for the progress you've made, and it just seems so amazing in such a short, within this year, you've really basically, based on the timeline you just outlined, that it's all happened this year. It's really, I think, phenomenal. So congratulations on that. So a few things. So you would kind of address that liability thing, because that's what keeps coming up with work when you want to bring volunteers in to do anything, is this liability question that kind of seems to create a lot of red tape. And then specifically, I wondered, because I kept seeing the visuals of the water coming down from the roadways. So here we have massive amounts of salt on our roadways due to, and it sort of hits home because we've just had my landscape doesn't look like this right now. It's very white. We just had a massive amount of snow. So it reminds me of that salt issue on the roadways. And is that something you contend with, or is it not so much in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, I actually think that in Portland, they don't allow you to use salt, they use gravel
Mm.
instead. So I'm fortunately not contending with that.
That's great.
I do wonder about how to move the salt into a different zone, or maybe dilute it somehow in ways that would help it not prevent plants from growing. But yeah, that's another interesting difficulty that
Yeah,
that
it's a
some
huge
places face.
issue here for sure, because that I just cringe at the idea of the runoff from the road going straight into the creek here, because yeah,
Mhm.
just it would be. Now they've started doing different things. I think they've tried to cut back on just spreading rock salt on the roads, which is one of the things that they do. They mix sand and salt in some places, and some places where it's too cold, they just use gravel or sand. But they've also, I think it's beet sugar or something, that they create a solution and spray the roads with that. So then it doesn't have the destructive properties to the infrastructure that the salt does. And less, perhaps less harm to the environment as a result of the runoff. But I don't know how much effort has gone into that. And I know, so I just wanted to just mention that Brian Pupa in the GTB has done incredible work with what we have in Ontario called the conservation authorities, that are actually watershed-based organizations that do conservation work along the waterways. And unfortunately, our provincial government has decided that they're going to reduce the number from 35 to 7. And I don't know how much this is going to impact his work, because he's done work with, I think it's 13 conservation authorities, and now it may just be ending up to be 1 or 2. And I don't know if, the programs and people that he's been working with I'm a little bit nervous to find out how that's going, because they're doing incredible mapping work, for example, and to do basically understand land use, and so because it came up when you talked about like doing the research on the map of who owned what, and finding pipelines and that kind of thing, that all these pieces are super important. And there's just been wonderful work here in Ontario that would make it easier, but I'm a little bit nervous about the future. So yeah, that bureaucratic piece and how things are changing over time, I can very much relate to. And thanks for sharing your insights, and congratulations again. Just fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to speak back to a couple pieces there. I'm not sure about how to manage the salt specifically, but I am curious, and I'm starting to work with universities in the area, like Portland State University, and seeing if their environmental program students would be interested in stewarding some parts of this project, and maybe doing some water and soil testing, and maybe designing ways to deal with some of the stormwater. So I think getting your local universities involved could be an interesting path forward with a project like this. And then I also want to say that in Portland, we are going through a sort of a watershed consolidation bureaucratically as well. And one thing I'm advocating for in that consolidation is that the individual geographic watersheds still maintain some decentralized autonomy, and through methods like sociocracy and things, so that even if they become under a bigger umbrella, they still get to operate inside of their own cultural and geographic identities. And so, yeah, I'd be really curious about like how that might take form with the conservation authorities. So thanks for bringing that in. And I'm teaching a sociocracy class next Monday. So if you want to learn more about that, please check that out. There's a collaborative governance space in the design school for Regenerating Earth. So
Cool.
And over to you, Karen.
I have a quick question about the graphic behind you, the picture behind you. Is that from the space?
So this is actually closer to the confluence with between Stevens Creek and the Willamette River. So this is the Willamette River. So this is near the confluence there, and you can see there's a lot of ivy growing up these trees, and this like pink flower there it is a sweet pea, which is also not native, but it is a nitrogen fixer. So it's interesting because mostly we just try to keep the ivy off the trees and we wait until we have plants that we can replace the ivy with so that we're not just leaving bare soil. And in the meantime, the sweet peas are doing some nitrogen fixing in the soil and keeping the soil on the ground. So, well, yeah, but this is, yeah, it's nearby. Thanks for bringing that up. I was going to mention that. So thank you. And over to you, Jonathan.
So it was really great seeing a lot of the places and getting the flashbacks to the visit that we had. And you really have made a lot of progress with it, and it's wonderful. It's congratulations. The other thing that was that I really liked Dave's idea that possibly municipalities could offer property tax breaks for improvements to land that help to restore the ecosystems. I think that's an idea worth investigating further. I don't know what kind of authority towns and cities might have to do that, but obviously other governments use that mechanism all the time. So, maybe this is something that we could try to encourage as a policy advance. And obviously a place like Portland, which is really progressive, ought to be one of the first to do something like this. So I thought that was a super idea.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing that in. I appreciate your perspective having actually physically been to the space. So yeah, beautiful. I'm really glad that you came. Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you all for coming. I just want to ask if there's like any last burning questions before we start to close the space. Okay, I think I'll go ahead and end the recording then.